consistent with this past draft that we heard about earlier?
It's my opinion that Corporal Payne probably is misusing some terms there. I don't see any possibility of the FBI CAS team producing a CAS draft report on the 23rd. I think he's probably mistaken that he saw some type of CAS work product, which would be this map, before they export all those results into a report. So I believe that he probably saw some mapping through a mapping platform. It would really surprise me if there was a physical report. It would be,
Yesterday, in your experience with working with AT&T records, is it common or uncommon to have two warrants, one that relies on the content of the first and the same day?
it's not uncommon to see a small time period that produces results that would increase the desire, the need for a bigger time period of records. Seeing that entire process happen twice in the same day is extremely rare.
When the first AT&T record, we've called it today the 48-hour AT&T record of Brian's call detail record. If you were to take that and do an analysis on a call detail record, how long would that take?
Depends on the analysis. So I'll qualify that answer with looking at what was put into the second warrant that shows us at least parts of that analysis to include a route that was identified. To do it reliably and feel comfortable that I'm accurate, 3 hours, and that's if you know what you're doing and you have all the tools at your disposal. Arguably, you can spend half a day working that very easily.
To do that, do you just take these records, printed copy, and know what's on there, or do you have to do something to those records?
You have to use some type of a mapping platform, software, and you would take the digital copy, which is typically a text file, you would import it into that program, which would then map everything. But if I'm going to use those results, search warrant affidavit, for example, there's a process that I'm going to go through to confirm the accuracy, because in theory, if I'm wrong, the entire linchpin in that case is now hinged on this affidavit that I wrote. So before I commit to swearing out to an affidavit, hey, this is what the phone is doing, X, Y, and Z, there's a further process of just mapping it to validate it. In this case, there's a lot of time distance measurements that need to be performed that can be extremely time consuming. There's some ulterior issues that come up with how that phone is interacting with other cell sites that needs to be analyzed. Again, saying that a very qualified, confident investigator spending half a day just coming up with that basic summary is very reasonable.
And that half a day, you would put that record into a computer program, and a map would be produced?
Correct. So when, I will emphasize, when all of the data is mapped, and I'm talking about the CDRs, we can get a really good idea, hey, a phone traveled north for 10 miles and then it traveled east. The drive test data would actually allow us to replicate and recreate these tower handoffs that we're seeing to come up with that first theory. So now we can say, in order to do this and hit these towers in the sequence that it did, it has to be driving on this highway. And then when it went east, it most likely turned onto this highway. So the drive test data helps us get very specific with what the CDRs mean.
As an investigator and performing an analysis work done in this case, when you have the CDRs and call detail records that tell you where a phone's been, is that useful in directing your investigation to what other evidence might be out there, like videotapes?
Qualify my answer to it, because I'm not sure if you're asking specifically for this case or in general. Yes, you map all of the data, and especially if you're going to justify 6 months worth of data on somebody's cell phone, you map every single connection that there is in those records. From what I have reviewed, the FBI mapped 6% of the data that came in. Mallory's testimony and what I've seen through here, he was up to about 18%. So by either standard, more than 80% on both accounts were never mapped or accounted for. And I'm not talking overall from every single day for 6 months. I'm talking about the time frames that are chosen. So, for example, this time period that's represented here is where I'm getting the 18%.
And that's the 48 hours?
This is specifically from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on the morning of the 13th, arguably the most critical time period of this entire investigation.
And now moving on to request 317, 322, 319, 320, 321, 323, 320, and 324. And then picking back up with 302. Those are all surveillance camera items that we've requested. We're asking the court to order Moscow Police Department, as the custodian of these things in this case, to do an inventory of what's there. You heard last week that Detective Mallory said, I don't have the videos, those aren't my responsibility. You heard today Detective Payne said, it's Mallory and FBI agents. So we take Mallory out of the equation. He said, I didn't do it, I can't tell you where these videos are. I don't know who the FBI agents are, so first I think the court ought to order that be disclosed to me. The second offer was that I can go to the Moscow Police Department evidence room and go through hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of videotapes, and that's just not reasonable. These are videotapes that have been collected in the course of this investigation. You heard Detective Payne say that when he looked at cameras on South 95 and the other road, south of Moscow, on the date in question, and in conformance with what he alleged in his affidavit of probable cause to arrest Brian, he looked at those videos and he didn't find a car. That screams stuff that's exculpatory to me. I need to know where these videos are. They were collected. The court can see that from the reports that we put in the packet of evidence. The court knows they've been collected, but nobody can tell me where they are. And I need to have I don't physically have time to go watch thousands of hours in Moscow Police Department and be efficient with the case. But if that's what I have to do, I guess I need the court to tell me that's what I have to do. I think you have the ability to order that there be an accounting of all of these videos. Keep in mind, what we heard today was exculpatory. So there has to be a duty to categorize all of these videos and get that information to me. Go find these videos that other police officers turned over to Moscow Police Department that are in relevant areas. That's just critical, and that needs to happen. The rest of them, 335, 336, 337, 338, and 339, the state has indicated that we've been given everything there is and nothing else exists. This all has to do with vehicle identification, and we're talking about identifying a car in question from the video as being a 2011 to 13 Elan truck. They say we have it all. So if we have it all, that's great. I just don't want any surprises. Again, Your Honor, and we think the court should order the things as we outline. They are material to the preparation of our defense. I will remind the court that relevance is the standard of whether it is in front of the jury, but it's a different standard when we're talking about materiality. That was talked about the Pendleton case, and I know the court's familiar with the Pendleton case. The court wrote about that in a previous order.
Yes.
So I'll leave it at things that we're seeking in these motions to compel are things that are outlined in the probable cause affidavit. Based on your, I guess, not as thorough as you do review of these records, do you have a sense as to whether these records matter to us and what we're doing to defend Mr. Koberger?
Given the timing of these records, from what I can tell in the emails that were produced by Detective Mallory, these records were generated on the 23rd of December. It's when everything started with probable cause statements. If I had to pick a time when the wheels fell off the wagon, that's the date. There are statements and there's assumptions made in the records that will never be supported by the data. There's a lot of claims that are said in these emails, and even the name files of the records are problematic. It does not represent what it's claimed to represent.
Sounds like those might be pretty important to us to defend Mr. Koberger.
Data. Some of the most significant locations in this case, we're missing some data.
Those significant locations, have they been depicted or captured on the cast draft report?
They have.
And tell me what those locations are. What are we missing?
I am unable to find any measurements along, I believe it's 270, the Moscow-Pullman Road. If you drove the most direct route from Pullman to Moscow or vice versa, pretty much as soon as you're leaving Pullman to the time that you arrive in Moscow, we are missing that entire stretch. If there's ever been a case that we need to look at, what does it look like when a phone travels from Pullman to Moscow? This is probably the case. We have the neighborhood around the crime scene, but we don't have the crime scene. I am concerned since the very first day I saw the cast draft report that there are significant errors in drive testing. It was before I even saw the drive test. I can look at the coverage areas and I can tell you they're wrong. So, yes, it's not a concern that they're wrong. People make mistakes, we can fix things. It's a concern that I still don't have the source data that any expert, not just myself, but anybody could sit down and look at and say, okay, I see what's happening here. Here's how we fix this. Unfortunately, that mistake has a ripple effect, and I'm seeing multiple errors that are happening as a result. So that's why this data is important, is we've reached a point that we need to determine, is this just human error? Is this accidental? Is it intentional? Is there other things at play here that's changing this narrative to where there's clearly some manipulation of the original data?
Things that we're seeking in these motions to compel are things that are outlined in the probable cause affidavit.
Why certain things were being looked at before Mr. Koberger's arrest or well into late in the year in 2023 related to the victims, and try to piece together, is that something that the state is still seeking because they're pursuing the alternate suspects that exists in this case? The state is getting, and we are desperate to find out the timeline in this case and when the state knew what and when. There's no question that motions to suppress are coming. Motions to suppress are coming on warrants. And whether or not those motions to suppress are based on Frank's material because misrepresentations are made depends on the timeline. So if there's a representation made in a warrant that things happened in a certain way, if we are able to look at the timeline and say, we know that the state knew this when, that gives us an answer on whether or not the suppression issue includes a truthful statement in the affidavit.